Good morning, dear ones, and welcome to Unity Church. A very special welcome to those of you who are visiting with us this morning. We tune in from our singular rooms to join together in worship. Welcome to this time we set aside each week to help us find and keep our balance, to think about those things that matter most, to root out racism in ourselves and in the world, and to align our lives to integrity, service, and joy. Here in the sanctuary, your worship leaders gather, taking appropriate precautions, learning as we lead to offer clarity, comfort, and inspiration in these trying times. We know that nothing can replace the face-to-face, hand in hand, voices raised in song, embodied worship can bring. But we also know that the ministry we share has never been about a building. This church is not closed. After the service, whether this is your first time with us or you've been with us your whole life, you are invited to participate in a virtual Zoom coffee hour where we share a bit of our lives with each other and get to know one another more deeply. Stay for just a few minutes or up to 45 minutes to connect in smaller breakout rooms. Information about how to participate is available on Unity's homepage, and the link to coffee hour will be shared at the end of this service. If you would like to learn more about Unity Church and Unitarian Universalism, we invite you to participate in Finding Yourself at Unity today at 1 o'clock. This week's 1-hour online class will offer a virtual building tour. Information about how to connect with the class is available on our homepage. Next Sunday, we continue our worship theme of Journey with Angela Wilcox and her children Lucy and Nelson Marukian as they map a journey of accountability. In the coming days and weeks, we will continue to find new ways to come together for worship, for learning, for deep connection, for justice and love. Welcome and stay tuned.
What else do I have to do? I joked for probably the 38th time on a video call. In this pandemic-stricken world, where so many of the activities that I would have been drawn to in the past are wisely put on hold, I have found myself reconnecting with my love of being outdoors. From walking down city streets to checking off that next state park hiking club trail, this time of maintaining distance has helped me to feel closer to the natural world around me. And it's not just the walk or the hike itself that opens my eyes. So often there are things crying out to be noticed as part of the journey itself. Maybe more than anything, I've had the chance to slow down as the rush to get from activity to appointment to meeting has lulled. It's in these moments where I've come to recognize and appreciate and contemplate the things along the way that help us get to where we're going, to keep us on the path we've chosen. Come, let us worship together.
Be thou my vision, O God of my heart, not be all else to me, save that thou art, thou my best thought, by day or by night, waking or sleeping, thy presence my light. Be thou my wisdom, and thou my true word. I ever with thee, and thou with me, God. Thou my soul's shelter, thou my high tower. Raise thou me heavenward, O power of my power. Riches I heed not, nor world's empty praise. Thou my inheritance, now and always. Thou and thou only, first in my heart. Sovereign of heaven, my treasure thou art.
Please join me in today's Unison Affirmation, the task of the religious community, number 580. The central task of the religious community is to unveil the bonds that bind each to all. There is a connectedness, a relationship discovered amid the particulars of our own lives and the lives of others. Once felt, it inspires us to act for justice. It is the church that assures us that we are not struggling for justice on our own, but as members of a larger community. The religious community is essential, for alone our vision is too narrow to see all that must be seen, and our strength too limited to do all that must be done. Together, our vision widens and our strength is renewed. Please join me in a moment of silence.
Each time we gather for worship, we set aside a moment to expand the caring ministry of this congregation. Together we recognize the cycle of life and death, the circle of love, compassion, and witness that is at the center of this and every sacred community. We stand at the side of parents and teachers and all those whose primary spiritual practice is caring for children, with those who live with grief or chronic pain, with illnesses seen and unseen, with mental disability or addiction. We pray for our neighbors in prison, those who care for family members in ill health, those who are struggling to stay afloat in the midst of poverty. Our lives are blessed by those who knowingly and with curiosity and courage face their final days. We pray for those in harm's way, for the wisdom and strength of the leaders of the world, and for the people of this courageous congregation, as together we live into our longing to embody and help to build the beloved community. Will you pray with me for all these we now name? We join Matt and Kelly Nelson, Marin Nelson and Darren Kovar, and other members of their family as they grieve the death of Nancy Nelson, a remarkable woman who died peacefully this past week, surrounded by her loving family. A live stream service from Westminster Church is scheduled for the future. Raytuan Trechuan, age 20, died this past Thursday, son of Russell Ballinger III and Tara Colton. Grandfather Russell is heartbroken. We hold him and Sarah as they mourn Russell's beloved grandson. And we join Dave Kaminsky and his wife Barb as they grieve the loss of Dave's sister, Lois Powlitz. Lois died at home where she had been on home hospice since the 3rd of July, having elected to not attempt treatment for her advancing lung cancer. We send our healing thoughts and prayers to Chuck Griggs' brother, Louis, who has been diagnosed with COVID and has just been put on a ventilator in a hospital in California. The family knows Louis to be strong, healthy, and a fighter, so we join them in hope for a full recovery. And we are thrilled to welcome one more Redeemer into this world. Ava Ward Murphy was born to Jane Prince and Dave Murphy's son, Sam Murphy, and his wife, Lindsay Sessing, in St. Paul on July the 17th. She was 7 pounds, 9 ounces, and 20 inches. Everyone is ecstatically in love. We grieve with the world for all those lost in the explosion in Beirut. We hold those thousands healing from their wounds. And lastly, we acknowledge all the currents of grief flowing all over the planet as lives are lost to the coronavirus. Every day people are lost, and every day the grief grows. May we each light a candle, memorializing all that has been lost, and for all who are finding their way. So may we stand in compassionate solidarity with our neighbors here at home and all around the world. May they and may we be instruments of a just and lasting peace. I now invite you to speak aloud or hold in the silent sanctuary of your hearts the names of those you would like to live today in worship. And let us pray. O Holy One, source of hope and faith and change, the ancient scriptures tell us that an angel of the Lord appeared to Moses in flames of fire from within a bush on fire, but not consumed. As with Moses, call us to take off our shoes so that wherever we find ourselves, we may know holy ground. Here in our wilderness, as we search to find our way, call us to remove our shoes that we might touch the very ground and source of life, tender to the touch of each moment and meaning and song and prayer. To give ourselves wholly to the meaning of the world and our lives at this moment in our history. Help us to risk that relationship of faith and hope that can hold the contradictions, hold the sacred juxtapositions of our lives, of joy and woe that are woven fine. Holy One, call us to shed our shoes as animals would shed their skin, that we as individuals and we as a people might let go of what does not make for the flourishing of life. As guests who take off their shoes and step into welcome and hospitality, grant us wisdom to step onto pathways that welcome new practices, new prayers, and imagines new ways of being together in a world with greater justice and wholeness and equity, where all places become holy ground. May it be so, and amen.
Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to share a little piece of my own journey as our story. To all the kids who are listening, feel free to come closer in. Shortly after I moved to Berlin, I made a couple really close friends who are from Pakistan. We got to know each other by working on a project for the Kashmir conflict. After the project, they invited me to go see a movie with them. And on my way, I was worried I was going to be late because I was still new to the city and learning about the U-Bahn system, which is the German subway. And so I was rushing and a little stressed out. And I got there a couple minutes before the movie was supposed to start. But to my surprise, people were hanging out outside, drinking tea and talking. One of my friends was getting interviewed on camera. And another friend was bustling around preparing the dinner for the banquet we were going to have afterwards. I was surprised and curious, and a little awkwardly, I decided to walk around and listen and observe. And I remember hearing Urdu and Arabic, German and English, all being spoken in the same place, sometimes even within one conversation. And then slowly people started to move towards the theater, and so I found my friend and we sat down and watched as my other friend was on stage and invited the director of the movie up, and they were talking as if they were old friends and shared about how important it was for the Pakistani community that a Pakistani artist like Manto, the writer, had their own biopic showing in theaters. The movie was beautiful and intense and heartbreaking, one of those where you're kind of sitting at the edge of your seat and sometimes tearing up. And at the end, everyone got up and was clapping, and people were hugging me who I hadn't met yet, and it was a big celebration moment. And then slowly, there were about 100 of us in the theater. We started to move towards the door and go upstairs to enjoy dinner together. There were plates of curried rice with veggies and chicken and beef korma with lentils and noodles, and lamb kebab with naan and yogurt sauce with fresh fruit and salad on the side. And we all ate and had conversation and hung out for about an hour. And then small groups of people would leave and go down to the cafe and drink coffee late into the night, which is where I ended up with my friends. Everyone was sitting around and drinking coffee, except for me, because I still wanted to go to sleep later. When I finally got home, I was pretty exhausted, but it had been a blast. I had spent about 6 hours that evening with my friends, and it was very different than the casual movie, popcorn, little bit of chatting about how it was evening that I thought I was going to. It was also really different than how I spend time with my German family, who eats dinner at pretty much the same time every night and goes to bed at least Sunday through Thursday at pretty much the same time every day and adheres to a regular, timely schedule, which in turn is different than my American family. As some of you know, we're usually about 5 to 10 minutes late everywhere, and we like to talk about what it is that we're going to do and spend a lot of time discussing and figuring out the general plan so that everybody's on board, but is also flexible enough in case it changes. But the more I spent time with my Pakistani friends, I learned that this evening that to me had felt special, maybe like a festival or a large family reunion, was pretty normal for the way that they spent time in their community together. And so they invited me to poetry readings and protests and a panel on Kashmir and even just a meeting discussing what our next project was going to be. And there was always a large dinner that everyone was invited to, and conversation and hanging out, and we would end up at a cafe with everybody except me drinking coffee. So I quickly learned that in order to spend the whole evening with my friends, I needed to be prepared. So I brought a backpack. And there was always food and it was delicious, but I have allergies and I'm also not used to eating a lot of spicy Pakistani food all the time. So it was helpful to have a plan B just in case, with some snacks that I was familiar with and knew wouldn't make me feel nauseous or sick. So I brought things like trail mix and olives and peanut butter with apple. And I always liked to bring canned sardines, which are delicious. And I also started to wear a watch because it was hard for me to not know when something was going to start or end. But at least knowing what time it was and how long I had been somewhere, helped me, along with my backpack full of snacks, feel like I could show up and let things unfold as they were going to. I also learned that I had to say goodnight before I actually wanted to leave, because in my experience, a Pakistani goodbye is even longer than a long Minnesotan goodbye. My friends would tease me in a friendly way about not being able to eat the spicy food or drink coffee late at night, and that I often wanted to know what time it was and go to bed early. But they were also curious and understanding that there were different things that brought me comfort. And overall, they welcomed me in to be part of their community, even part of what felt like their family. So much so that when I got home and was living again in Minnesota, with the foods that I was used to and the places in the Twin Cities that I knew like the back of my hand and the routines and schedules that I was familiar with, something felt odd. It still felt like home, but I was different. I had been changed by my experiences and these relationships, and my sense of what felt like home and what was familiar had expanded beyond what I had grown up with. May we, as we travel back home from whether near or far, come back to ourselves with a greater understanding of our own cultural norms and differences, and allow our senses of home and comfort to be expanded, so that what we know is still familiar, but what is less known to us may also become familiar. Let us be expanded in just such a way. May it be so, and amen.
Though our ministry now is largely online, the church's financial obligations continue. Your support of the church is an expression of the promise we make to one another and to the greater world. We know that some of you have had your hours reduced, and that some of you are furloughed or have lost your job. Please let us know if you are facing financial difficulty. We're here to help. But don't let fear undermine your commitment to the ministry we share. Please do your best to be generous with the church so that the church can, in turn, maintain our staff and programs and keep our promises to the many community partners our Sunday offering support. Today, the larger portion of our offering will support the Circle of Peace movement and its mission to end violence and promote racial healing. The Circle of Peace movement works to create safe space where people come together on a regular basis to share a meal and engage in respectful conversation. Through Circle, participants come to understand and care for one another and find hope and strength to transform communities. Founded by Unity Church members Russell and Sarah Ballinger, and supported by many others in the community, the Monday Night Circle of Peace has been meeting at Unity for 10 years. So during the offering interlude, please visit Unity's homepage and follow the link in the Sunday service section to make your donation. You can also use the Give function located on our Shelby Next membership app and online database, or just mail a check to the church. Thank you, and thank you for your generous contribution.
A reading from Guidelines for Guardrail Implementation from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. The goal of roadway safety devices is to protect motorists from potentially serious hazards located near the travelway. Bridge piers, utility poles, and severe embankments are hazards that, if encountered, may be deadly. In order to protect motorists, barriers must be placed in front of a roadside obstacle and must be much longer than the hazard in order to limit the risk of a serious crash when vehicles leave the road in advance of the barrier. Unfortunately, barriers also pose a risk to motorists. In fact, guardrails cause approximately 1,200 fatalities along the nation's highways annually. Further, crash data analysis indicates that approximately 13% of reported guardrail crashes involve rollover, and almost 2% produce a fatality. For lower risk hazards, such as small objects and moderate slopes, the number of serious crashes associated with a guardrail can be greater than the number of similar impacts that would occur without the guardrail. In this situation, guardrail construction would increase the number of injured motorists compared to leaving the hazard unshielded. Clearly, there is a need for an optimum guardrail selection criterion that will produce a minimum number of injury and fatal crashes. Doesn't that technical writing just sing sweetly off the page to you? Guardrails. Sometimes they can be good. Sometimes they could also be bad. Weighing the trade-offs and considering how to appropriately navigate that gray area is music to this transportation planner's ears. Clearly, there are instances where guardrails are called for despite the potential risk that they might provide. I know I certainly have benefited from the sense of security that they convey while traveling up a steep mountain road. And yet, for all the benefits that guardrails provide, they don't exist as a completely harmless addition to our world. I can certainly think of times when I've been in the mountains or maybe watched a scene from a TV show or movie where a winding, perilous road travels up the side of a steep rock face with only a small guardrail between the people traveling up and an imagined horrible descent going down. The scrapes, dents, and twists that show up on guardrails are a reminder to us that these are not the walls of a bouncy castle, nor the amusing rebound of a bowling alley bumper. They're far from it. Using one of these safety devices leaves a lasting impact, and as we heard, one that can unfortunately have serious consequences. This challenges me. A device that on its face seemingly exists to reassure me that, I got you, you'll be safe, is true a large portion of the time and for a large percentage of people and situations. But it makes some key assumptions about situational factors that we know can vary dramatically. What kind of vehicle might hit it? And at what speed? Is there space for a person to walk or bicycle along it without feeling squeezed either against the railing or by the nearby cars? We could go on, and in every case we might land on a slightly different perspective of what would be appropriate in terms of installing a guardrail. In a theoretical sense, safety devices like guardrails are used all the time. Checks and balances, personal boundaries, ground rules. As individuals, groups of people, and even whole societies, we build things into our lives in an attempt to ensure that we don't stray too far from whatever has been determined to be the acceptable normal. In the same way that a guardrail can be unforgiving, I've learned how these interpersonal guardrails can also hurt when used, and perhaps no more than when engaging in anti-racism work. Perhaps further complicating things, I know that I set up guardrails in my own life based on feelings of comfort and safety. What if going to this art show might leave me feeling uncomfortable? What if things get awkward when I ask my friends who identify as white men something as simple as, how are you really feeling? What if things go sideways when I choose to unpack a racist trope that was used in conversation? Hitting some of these guardrails might be uncomfortable or hurt, especially compared to the false tidiness and false sense of security that white supremacist systems create for me in this world. The good news, I think, is that one of these theoretical guardrails in my life gets used and bundled over, there's a chance to rebuild it. I can take a step back and reconsider why the guardrail was where it was, and if I had set it up in a way that keeps me safe without offering the possibility of growth or wonder when I have the courage to approach the edge. I can share what I'm working through in my head with a friend to talk about how I'm approaching the reconstruction process. I can read works that offer guidance and best practices on how to consider where I place my own guardrails, or perhaps even question if the guardrails should exist. There's anxiety for me in thinking about moving my own guardrails, or perhaps doing away with them completely. But when I stop and imagine that mountain scene from before, and then pull the guardrails out of that picture, my, what a beautiful sight that is.
We are told that there is always an other that threatens on the borders of our world. Those others cannot be understood or approached, only contained or assimilated or driven away. Fear becomes central to the installation of homeland securities with scant mechanisms of public oversight and accountability. That familiar fear, that dangers to the Republic are incubating in the lifestyles of dark-skinned and alien people congregating in areas beyond the oversight of white middle-class culture. That fear, exploited in the contact zones between familiarity and difference, strangeness and recognizability, our world and their world. Contact zones marked by barriers, marked by guardrails, surveillance technologies, marked by that frantic certainty in those claims, we are not them, and they are not us. We are not them, they are not us. Such an ordinary and innocent comparison, if it were not so fraught and dangerous. However odious comparisons may be, and they often are, human beings are comparison-making creatures. Comparison is the very basis of our value system, of why one thing matters more than another thing. Comparison is our way of making sense of the world, and even more, our survival in this world. As comparatist Wendy Doniger states, the cave person who reasoned, this saber-toothed tiger looks a lot like that lion I saw yesterday. This animal also may try to eat me. Therefore, I should run from this tiger as I did from that lion. That cave person is our ancestor. But the one who reasoned, I've never seen this animal like this one before. That lion yesterday had no stripes. This animal does. And there is differences in the main. There really is no comparison. That cave person did not live to bequeath their genes to us. But comparisons and evaluating whether things are the same or different stir trouble in our politics of identity and our reach for a multicultural community. We look to difference for wonder, diversity, and the uniquely personal and singular nature of our lives. But difference can be alienating and threatening. And so then we look to sameness for stability, for shared human experiences and universal concepts that can anchor our society and common life. But our preference for others whose sameness is more immediately apparent to us proves not only easier, but ethnocentric. Sameness that serves to assimilate the other into me and into us. But no matter what sort of other we choose at the beginning, from the initial assumption of sameness or similarity, we must inevitably come to terms with what's at the other end of the pole, that pole of difference. Stay with me here. In the work of multiculturalism, similarity or sameness is no longer allowed to be the norm. Yes, it may be inevitable that I begin by assuming what the other is like me, but it must be immediately qualified by difference. And even more, the shifting of the reference point. I must go from saying, you are like me, to I am like you. The center must shift. At some point in the comparison, one must find a way to pass over to the other side, to see with the eyes of the other, before coming back and seeing one's own standpoint changed. To see with the eyes of the other with such clarity that to state that all lives matter is actually not to see black lives at all. There are those who argue that the entire comparative approach is prone to misuse and exploitation, that there is no value-neutral place to fairly make comparisons, that comparisons have been used by the powerful to make bad comparisons that yield bad judgments by others and other cultures, and that comparisons are politically dangerous. I may very well be in the minority opinion, but I don't think we should nor can close the comparative shop just because the shop is being picketed by people whose views, by and large, I happen to share. Rather, if being human is to be a comparison-making creature, I want to set the bar much higher in the work of cross-cultural comparison and make the necessity of getting good at it a pressing task for us. What does getting good at cross-cultural comparison look like? 2 stories from the field, from those living and working in those contact zones of one culture alongside another, about passing over to enter into another person's standpoint, to see the world anew as that person sees it, and then coming back to one's own standpoint, challenged and enriched. Robert Orsi, a religious scholar fascinated with American Catholic religious culture, was researching the devotion to Saint Jude, the patron saint of hopeless causes. Orsi himself had grown up thinking that his immigrant Italian family's religiosity was absolute madness. Why do people pray to the saints and think that saints can somehow miraculously intervene in their lives? Are those believers simply naive or ignorant or worse? Isn't the measure of a mature religion the abandonment of primitive ideas about God and supernatural beings? Orsi was firmly rooted in the intellectual assumptions of the objective academic study of religion. But something began to happen as he interviewed women who felt their lives were indeed changed by St. Jude's intervention. Women who were struggling to keep their marriages, their families, and themselves intact. All during the hardships of the Great Depression, World War II, and the assimilation of Catholics into an often hostile Protestant America. You're studying them, Orsi. A voice taunted him. You're studying them, Orsi. Which means that they sat down and told you stories about their experiences of hopelessness and about their desperate prayers asking St. Jude to help. But, Orsi, what have you given them? What stories have you shared? What will you give them, especially after you translate what you understand of their experience into academic idioms that won't recognize any more of what their experience feels like to them? Orsi's discomfort deepened when one of the women he was interviewing turned the questions back on him. The woman asked Orsi, "Have you ever prayed to St. Jude?" "No," he answered. "Then how do you expect to understand what we're doing when we pray to St. Jude?" She insisted, "You have to promise me, Dr. Orsi, that someday you'll ask St. Jude for something you really want at a time when you really need him. Then maybe you'll understand what we're doing," she said. "And St. Jude might even help you." As a scholar trained to pursue objectivity, Orsi instinctively rejected the woman's suggestion, but he wondered more and more and more about the adequacy of his academic approach for understanding what was really happening when these women prayed to St. Jude. The women were advocates of what he would later call lived religion, of knowing through experience, and in particular, the experience of pain and struggle. So when Orsi himself was faced with a paralyzing personal crisis, he found himself praying. And he discovered just how difficult it is to put one's desires and hopes into simple words, knowing that there's no chance that those wishes will be granted. But he also discovered something quite unexpected from crossing over into prayer. That when he was finally able to admit what he truly wanted, he found in the enclosed space of his despair a tiny opening of faith. Orsi concludes, "This helped me to understand the feeling that women describe after praying to St. Jude. We may not celebrate or condone the practices of others, but we cannot easily dismiss them as inhuman or alien from us, that they cannot be approached or understood. It is chastening," he goes on, "and liberating to stand in an attitude of disciplined openness and attentiveness before a religious practice or belief of another culture on which we do not impose our wishes, dreams, desires, or fears. Among other things, this discipline of passing over offers the possibility of defamiliarizing us in relation to our own cultures, confounding our certainties, unearthing hidden agendas, qualifying our judgments, and above all, to engage the religious practice and imagination within the circumstances of other people's lives, and then in context, our own. If being human is to be a comparison-making creature, the bar has been set much higher in the work of cross-cultural comparison, as well as the necessity of our getting really good at it. What does really getting good at it look like? Jonathan Walters, a historian of religions, was living in Sri Lanka and studying the religion and healing methods of the people in a certain village. He was committed to the belief that non-Western healing methods had been unjustly neglected by Western science, and that in many instances they were far more effective. Walters became ill, dangerously ill with cholera, and treated himself with indigenous remedies, but to no avail. With a high fever and dehydration that left him unable to eat or stand up, he realized that he would likely die if he did not get the medicine he needed. Western medicine, antibiotics. But to ask to be taken to the American hospital, he felt would be to severely undermine the work he had done during all those years. A slap in the face of the people who had trusted him to cherish the medicines they had taught him. Walters couldn't bring himself to do it. And as he lay there, breathing in what he believed to his final breath, the people of the village came, put him on a stretcher, and carried him to the place where they started to perform their religious healing ceremony. The healer began a seance for Walters, using the familiar methods to induce a trance. And during the trance, their God entered the healer and spoke through the healer something absolutely startling. The healer said, "Let the white man go to the white man's doctor." They took Walter straight to the hospital, and he lived to document the experience, which he came to call "Love and My Time of Cholera." Walter's story of passing over and coming back is indeed a story of love, about the conflict between our love for the other and our commitment to our own worlds. A love that risks exposure and vulnerability to disorientation of meeting a very different reality. The challenge of being with people who love differently than oneself, who inhabit their bodies differently, who have had to contend with political realities perhaps unknown to many of us. Love that disorganizes our lives and opens us to alternate social imaginaries. I am not making an argument for ignoring complex issues of power and structure, nor am I saying that to be open demands conversion to the ways of the other. It does mean seeing one's own world from the place of the other, to be able to imagine different ways of living and to try to understand them on their own terms. And it means that our own world is likely not going to look the same, and that we won't be able to claim the same taken for granted authority as we did before we set out on the great experiment of our time. That spiritual journey of our time, which is passing over from one culture to another, from one way of life into another, of entering into the experience of others by sympathetic understanding and coming back to see ourselves anew. Seeing that the window into the other world turns out to be the mirror into our own lives. And in the play of reflections, to glimpse the promise of beloved community. May it be so, and amen.
Be that guide whom love sustains, rise above the daily strife, lift on high the good you find, help to heal the hurts of life. Be that helper nothing daunts, doubt a friend or taunt a foe, ever strive for liberty, show the path that life should go. Be that builder trusting good, bitter though the test may be, through all ages they are right, though they build in agony. Be that teacher faith directs, move beyond the old frontier, though the frightened fear that faith be tomorrow's pioneer.
In that ancient and early practice we know from our own childhood of what is same and what is different has never been more important than it is now. As we reach to build a multicultural community built on authentic relationships, may we know that the play of same and different is nothing other than the play of love itself. May that be so, and amen.